I'm here with Brian Swimme and Monica DeRaspe-Bolles to discuss their new wonderful book, Story of the Noosphere, which I found out won the Nautilus Book Awards. So congratulations and thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
me,
Thank
both
you,
of you,
Brian.
Monica
Thank
and
Good to
you.
be
Brian.
here.
I wanted to ask you, for the first time someone comes across this book at a bookstore, how would you define the noosphere to them and why should they know about the noosphere more?
Okay, yeah. I think that the simplest way of thinking about the noosphere is just to look at the history of Earth. It was molten rock at one time, and it could have stayed that way forever. The geosphere, but the geosphere invented life, which spread out over the whole thing. And we have the biosphere, and that could have remained that way forever. It did for billions of years. But then, just in recent evolutionary history, the biosphere has invented the noosphere. So, what do we mean by that? We mean noosphere as in knowing sphere. It is the planet knowing itself through human consciousness. And I want to let Monica speak, but just one last line here. We just say that the noosphere is the construction for the first time in life history, the construction of a planetary mind. Monica, how would you say it?
Well, I would say that since the beginning, Earth constructs ever more powerful brains. This process is called cerebralization, and the global brain is the noosphere. Now, it made its first brain maybe 500 million years ago with a little marine animal that is now extinct, looked like a little scorpion, but it was a nervous system coordinating cells. And then it became more complexified where collective nervous systems evolved, like sea jellies and coral reefs. And this became like a collective brain of individual brains, like ant colonies, So now there were collective brains of brains where, but then the humans have constructed these larger and larger collectives, where we start off as hunting groups and villages and cities. And now, so you can imagine each of the nations as a collective mind, but now it's a collection of collective minds.
Hmm.
So a larger community is forming. And we're building a brain of brains. 8 million autonomous human brains make up a collective intelligence, and that's
Mhm.
the noosphere.
And just to add on one thing
Sure.
to complete your question, I'm in a bookstore, right? Somebody's walking by our book, and I'm offended that he doesn't pick it up. Why do I tell him? What do I say that convinces him it's important? I mean, it's the biggest thing happening on our planet right now, the creation of a collective intelligence. And not to know that is to be out of touch with what's happening. So this
Mhm.
is in our thinking, and AI is a subset of this. But this is what's happening today, and it's thrilling to be part of it. As opposed to being constantly depressed by what's coming out of Washington D.C. This is a vision of real power and hope. End of sermon.
We think of there being three major transformations that we're involved in. Not, and then there's tons of little mini ones. But there's three major ones. And the first is the primordial plasma to the stars, galaxies, and planets, where the elementary particles come into communication with one another, come into relationship with one another, and primordial plasma becomes the galaxies. And then the molten rock and the matter and the bits of matter, the chemical elements come into relationship with one another, and out of that comes life. And now the living Earth is becoming a thinking Earth because of the deepening relationship among humans all around the surface of the planet. So we're in the midst of this major transformation. Like Brian says, what could be more important to know?
I definitely want to give you a chance to ask another question, but
Sure, no, go ahead.
I just want to say, listening to Monica, I mean, I'd want to ask viewers, what word did she use more than any other word? Maybe but I mean, in terms of a real substantial word, it was relationships. I mean, that's the amazing thing. Nothing came from outer space to transform rock into thinking humans. It's a deepening levels of relationship, and that extends to every part of one's existence. I just want to highlight that.
Joe, no, that's beautiful.
This is a new direction. It's quite different than how Newton saw the universe. It's quite different from how Einstein saw the universe. Relationships is fundamental, not static matter. Parham.
There are no external laws acting on little bits of matter to make this. It somehow made itself. Sorry.
No, that's great. I appreciate the relationship emphasis because as I was reading the part about dialogue, you had this word about dialogue. And basically, if you let dialogue happen, telos is going to emerge naturally out of that. And sort of to connect back to epigenesis that you also mentioned, I kind of view epigenesis as a sort of dialogue between cells where they there's just one genetic information where all the cells, as you mentioned in the book, from the embryo to adult human. But look what happens through development, through these cells coming together and speaking the language of DNA. So I want you to reflect on that, like epigenesis dialogue, because that's been a very inspiring part in the book for me.
Dialogue was a big thing for Monica. So Monica, you start.
Well, I was thinking I could speak to epigenesis,
Well, do that too.
You talk about your AI article as well, right? And it's a really amazing. This is such a cool area of research, and like Terry Deacon, there's so many wonderful stories about this. But there's the gene expression, but then environmental influences can actually engage. So our relationships with our environment and our experience in our world actually leads to something like could have been interpreted as Lamarckian evolution. So it's the timing of the way the structure, where things are located spatially, and it's also the timing of whether something will happen, right? So there's also a chapter in the book about we call it neotenic consciousness, and we speak about epigenesis there because they have actually identified specific FOX2P mutations that are that are epigenetic mutations that led to humans being differentiated from chimps. It happened at the same time that we're not directly related to but cousins, right? But we broke away from the primates due to a neotenic, where it's a throwback. Okay, so neoteny is where something, it speaks of the timing with which something will express itself. So neoteny is where the juvenile characteristics will remain dominant throughout the whole life of the adult. And so that's what is thought to be like Stephen Jay Gould, and even the humanists. So he's the evolutionary biologist, and then the humanists, Ashley Montague, understand neoteny as the explanation for human evolution, and they point to these neotenic mutations that occurred. So I just find that fascinating. And also I have to point out that neoteny is something that the universe in general does, where it returns to an earlier state of conditions, almost as if to explore the potencies that may have existed, that for some reason were just transient because things progressed and became and constraints came into play. So in the belly of a star, for instance, it's very close to the conditions at the primordial beginning.
Yeah, so
And
the way we think about it is that you have this primordial flaring forth, temperature is so hot and elementary particles are coming in and out of existence. And then there's an expansion and a cooling. And when it reaches a certain level of temperature, there is a contraction. And so you have the development of stars and galaxies. But like Monica said, you have stars that are being created, and at their core, they arrive at a state that's very similar to the early moments of the universe. So it's going back. It's back to the origin, where all the, as Monica said, where all the potencies are there. Just they're there. They're real, but they're not actual. And I just find it fascinating that this dynamic is cosmic, not just biological.
yeah, you see it in dogs as well. When all the pressures are removed, they will return to a play-like behavior their whole lives, and they'll act like young wolves. So of course, there's the salamander, that the oxalot. I mean, there's examples of this in biology, and cosmically we see this. So this epigenesis, it seems to be present in some sense, not just metaphorically, but like homology, the same form, even in the early universe.
And to connect us back to your question about dialogue, Parham, yeah, I mean, they're that in these moments of through the power of DNA, that the dialogue it stretches out over billions of years, so that we're interacting with the finest achievements of life with the birth of any new organism, and so it's whoa, so many brilliant things were achieved, and we carry all those forward, and we swim in them in dialogue with others to awaken what has been accomplished, but also something new.
And then culturally, of course, when you're in dialogue, you're able to recognize that the truths that sort of transcend the differences, and see similarities, and you're open to, things can be both true and not true.
I like that a lot. And I like the analogy or the concept of DNA being an accumulation of successful relationships that have been generated. But when in a way it relies on this ongoing dialogue to keep going. These evolutionary successes that have been offloaded onto DNA by themselves, they can't achieve much unless the dialogue happens and epigenesis through time and space happens. And that's where I see the song of biology, song of the cosmos being
Nice,
played.
nice. I love it.
Yeah.
The
And
song of biology, the song of life, song of
as
the cosmos.
I like that.
Beautiful.
And I wanted to ask, so you talk in the book about matter has some sort of memory. And my interest in seeing if whether organic, some sort of organic logic is happening in culture that sort of mirrors some of these more biological processes. But what I like about your approach is then you say the similar logic is also is operative in the cosmos. And you talk about stars. Maybe two questions here. Um, what is it about the sort of initial parameters of the universe? I mean, you talk about the rate, and sort of these universal parameters that exist, like the 10 to the 40 number that you talk about. That's mind-boggling. What is it about the initial parameters that allow this logic to be operative in all these fractal scales? What is it about the early universe that allows this?
The universe aims at convergence. There's a direction to cosmic evolution. And from the beginning, we can say that the development was inevitable. The rate of expansion initially, it guaranteed the assembly of the galaxies, the precise nuclear interaction, made certain that we're going to see the emergence of complex atoms. These numbers are so precise that it has caused Bernard Carr and Martin Rees, they're recognized experts on the early universe. They highlight the fact that there are 6 puzzling facts about the large-scale structure of the universe and the microscopic world of particle physics that are just right. The Goldilocks effect, right? That it made galaxies and planets and life and ultimately human conscious self-awareness to exist. So these thinkers are supporters of the strong anthropic principle, arguing that the universe must have a purpose and a meaning beyond the physical laws and structures from the beginning.
We in the 21st century have had 400 years of conceiving of the universe as being without meaning. So, I mean, that has to be remembered. Sociologically, we think that question has been taken care of, that matter itself is inert, right? And the universe is random. It's not going anywhere. These things are thought to be so settled that it's not even worth talking about them. Then we discovered some new stuff. I mean, it has to be brought out that way, that when you listen to Isaac Newton or Albert Einstein or any of these great scientists talk about the universe, they didn't have the information we have now. So it is a huge first principle that the universe itself is soaked with meaning. Now, there's tremendous tradition in developing the idea that meaning is constructed for the first time in the life world. All of that is really important. But there's another kind of cosmic meaning, and that is from the first instant. If we went back in time and we knew about the physics of our time, if we went back to the first moment in the universe and we just observed and measured what was taking place, we could predict with almost absolute certainty that the universe was going to bring forth stars, galaxies, rocky planets, rubies, emeralds. All of this is new, this idea. So I get all fired up about it. But I just think it's something that it'll be much easier for the next generation to move into that idea of the universe from the beginning. Right now, in the Milky Way galaxy, there's something like 100 billion planets. Maybe 300 million of them are in the habitable zone. I mean, we're in the lip of discovering an ongoing organizing activity that has been at work from the beginning and is now eventuating into a human species that can become aware of this whole thing. And that there we are with the noosphere.
So, from the beginning, the universe is going somewhere, and ultimately ends up here. And you I can't help but conclude that the universe advances its goal through the actions of the entities that it creates. And this is like a necessary consequence of the scientific discoveries in cosmology. That it has to be that way. Nothing else makes sense except to, I guess we could imagine a creator, but I'm not inclined to do that. We could imagine, some designer outside the universe, but I would never be inclined to do that.
That makes sense. Almost what I'm picking up on that a little bit is this convergence and communion idea. And you talk about repair as well. The way I've understood this cosmological idea better is like birth of an organism before the organism is developed. The process that happens is aimed at the development of the adult organism. So there is that aim early on. So I wonder if we could talk about the cosmos in a similar way. Brian, you talk about cosmogenesis in that sense, that there is some sort of process going on to bring about some sort of repair or convergence, but that process is rooted early on in the dynamics of the universe.
Well, I can start us off and just say, sort of somewhat loosely, I guess, but we can imagine the expansion of the early universe, and everything is separating apart, everything is moving apart, and then the universe repairs that situation by drawing things together into communities. The same thing happens with a galaxy. If if there are too many supernova explosions, right, it can disrupt the potentiality for new stars. A single phrase that captures the meaning of the universe with respect to this conversation is that the universe has a desire to create intimate communities. Now, some people talk about this as, like Teilhard would be one of them, as a desire, a drive to complexify and deepen consciousness. I'm just using language a little bit differently. So when is a community more intimate? It's more intimate when the relationships occur between all of the different components of the whole. And that drive we see in human history as well. I mean, this is one of the major points that we started off. We still are 99% identical with chimpanzees. Chimpanzees, it's a great species, two of them, of course, but they live in troops, of a couple dozen, and they have certain interactions with their world, and they've been doing this for tens of millions of years. Then we have this little mutation, giving rise to the human, and suddenly we break out. We break out just like the expansion of the universe. We break out into all directions. And then this amazing thing happens. The human groups fold back on themselves, so that it's like the universe folding back when it's expanding into galaxies. So we folded back and formed ever more intimate communities in the village, and then the chiefdom, in the cities of civilization, now in nation states. So it's amazing to see that this movement toward an earth community, a vibrant earth community characterized by mutually enhancing relationships. This is something that can be seen as an end result of a cosmic drive that began 14 billion years ago.
That was beautiful, Brian. It's known now that the universe is developing in time, that we're not a cosmos, we're a cosmogenesis. And so at every step along the way, I mean, one of the things you spoke about in your paper, Parham, is the recontextualization that is present in large length as a need for what it is that humans are doing with their large language models. Well, in some sense, every entity that exists throughout all time is in a time developing world, is recontextualizing whatever it is that is holding steady for them as the universe complexifies and lays down its habits over time. So that at all levels, there exists this creativity. Creativity is not something that is just a human attribute. And it's occurring at all levels of development, from the quantum to the macro, where everything that exists in a sea of constrained potentiality. And for some things, it's so constrained that we won't notice in our lifetime any movement at all, in many lifetimes. But in other things, It's just so active, and everything's being amplified by everyone. There nothing is ever 100 to 1, 100 to 0 or 99 to 1. We don't notice those things. We notice the 50-50 or the 50.1, and we notice that is what everything is paying attention to, and those things get amplified and are incredibly potent. And of course, our large language models are just that. But this exists. This potency exists because the universe is developing irreversibly throughout all of its layers of complexification, because the universe is a cosmogenesis where time becomes an arrow. And so in our view, in our understanding of the story of the noosphere, it's critical to understand ourselves as part of that 13.8 billion year whole. And it's amazing because then everything has the dignity of 13.8 billion year creation, and you can love what you want to love and amplify what you want to amplify. And those things will become part of the turning point of our future as the future presses into a new time developmental view of things. And if we could have that, and we understood the significance of time, not just for humans, but for, they need to get time into physics and into, it needs to become, we need to come to terms with the fact that the universe is developing in time in all of our disciplines.
Yeah, I think time is very important, and I sort of see it as the reanimating force. It's what's reanimating the patterns that are already present in early universe. And that sort of ties back the contextualization idea. So I like that a lot. And sort of another aspect of time in terms of how people understand it is we have this sense of deep time now, that with the universe is almost 14 billion years ago, and it could feel so distant that we're here and we're so distant from early universe, and we're just this accident on this distant planet. Or if we think about that, the same processes are happening inside of our body. So not just the distant time, but the sort of what time enables in the form of a process, and we're embodying that. To me, that's a beautiful vision.
Yeah, yeah. I I just love that phrase. Time is reanimating the forms. Yeah.
And I wanted to stick with the folding back idea, because
Yeah.
to me that's very profound. I mean, Teilhard talks about uses the word involution, sort of
Yeah.
turning in on itself, and the way I see it was like DNA was a folding back. It was a sort of the early life folding back on itself and sort of preserving all these successful traits that it acquired in form of heredity. And also Teilhard and Terence Deacon talks about how symbols were also another point of humanity folding back on itself. So that was like nature's adventure, the second adventure, maybe after DNA to fold back on itself. And this process keeps happening. Like writing is another like more extended version of that. And now with AI, we're even folding back on ourselves even more. And it seems like in each step there is an amplification of consciousness and self-reflection. Like this folding back enables deeper reflection and consciousness. So, and I love to see the parallels of this, like to the cosmos, where that happens, and just your general reaction to this folding back idea within this context.
Yeah, I would love to address that, just to start off with Teilhard and then to go to a personal experience. So Teilhard made the point that the human species is so different that it is something like a new phylum. And Terry Deacon makes the same point with different language, but the same point basically. So to be a new phylum means that you're the first of this new kind of thing to be built in 500 million years. That's amazing. And when we've been, humans have been here for, let's say 300, Homo sapiens, 300,000 years. All right. That's a blink of the eye. in geologically. In that blink, we've brought all of the ecosystems to the edge of their destruction or completely destroyed them. A blink accomplishes that. Life was working for 3.9 billion years, and we blink our eyes and it's on the verge of disappearing. I mean, that's what Teilhard and that's what Terry are they're trying to get at. Something of immense power is taking place. And Teilhard's way of identifying what it is that led to this is, as you've said already, Parham, is that we humans are the first species to fold back on ourselves, as opposed to diversifying as we moved out from our place of life. So life was doing great, 3.9 billion years, doing great. Fantastic things are happening. And then all of a sudden, whoa. I mean, I've already, let me just say one more thing. This blink of the eye. We were just like another little primate species, and we folded back on ourselves. And now what we have built is matches the entire biomass of the earth. I mean, it's incredible. This one little tiny species recoded the entire planet. So so here would be an example of a folding back, all right, that I had personally, and it relates to what you were saying about AI and all the rest. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but it appears to me now. So I just briefly, I was sick, and my heart was out of whack, and this is years ago, and I didn't know what to do. I'd gone to the hospital already once, and they didn't know what to do, but it had the fear of a heart attack. So anyway, my mind was a little bit altered because I was really worried about my health, and so I didn't want to talk to anybody. So as like a defense mechanism, I started staring at my arm, and in that moment, two things happened. I realized that I was experiencing warmth, and I knew, of course, that this was coming from photons that were colliding with my electrons and creating warmth. And we all know that's true, but in the moment, it dawned on me that there's an amazing jump from a photon coming from a star 100 million miles away and warmth. They're just different categories. So I was just sort of like, whoa. And then again, I knew, because of all of the reflection back that humanity has undergone, I knew that the atoms of my skin came into existence around 5 billion years ago with the explosion of a supernova. So just imagine how many humans have been aware that the sun was warming their skin, forever. But in that moment, because we fold back on ourselves and reflect on ourselves, I realized that I was an in-between. I was in between two different stars. Even though they're, one is millions of miles away and the other one is billions of years away, I was that creative process. That's what I was in that moment. I was witnessing it, and it's how I identified myself. So I mean, this folding back leads to experiences that are shockingly different from what we knew before, and they may be indications of the kind of viable species this new phylum will become.
Mhm. That's really powerful, Brian. We have such a profound responsibility. We're capable of more creative expression due to this sort of self-reflection knowledge that we've acquired. So we can think about things that no other animal has ever been capable of thinking about. But also, I said responsibility to say we're also capable of thinking about so much stress and so much, can think about evil too. So there is that aspect of the sort of the creativity can go both ways. Like we're capable of also experiencing so much pain
Yeah,
as well as profound ideas and meaning. And that puts so much emphasis on just being human. The ontology of being human just comes with such a big responsibility and so profound.
absolutely.
Especially since we, have are burdened by, a history of believing that even questioning our own consciousness, even questioning our own meaning in nihilism, and that's why it has felt so critical to really embolden others with energy, for making things better.
Yeah, that's great. And that's related to what you said, Monica. I was gonna bring this up. So one point of discussion I usually hear, and maybe it'd be good to clarify that here, is that whenever people talk about singularity and technology, there's this almost dystopian feel to it. Whether when other people talk about it, that we're just chips in a machine, we're gonna get replaced, and this process is gonna go on without us. So what I like about at the towards the end of your book, you sort of talk about Teilhard's idea of personalities not being lost during the convergence, the sort of
Ah,
the human energy that you're talking about there. Um, and I I think that's like such an important point to make sure it just comes across that
mhm.
with this idea, we don't mean that humans are gonna get replaced and there's this sort of machine that we're gonna get lost in. We're the drivers of this process and we shouldn't get lost. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on this.
Well, um, one of the phrases, Teilhard's phrase that has meant so much to me from the beginning, and it's become a guiding, a reminder for me to orient me towards how to understand the noosphere, has been unity differentiates.
Mm,
And you, without that differentiation, you cannot achieve the unity. So it is not becoming some homologous mass of sameness, but it's almost the most exciting place to be, is to be participating in a community where there actually is convergence and unification taking place. Think dialogue and all the positive things, or being in a loving relationship where you maintain your own autonomy completely, and in fact more fully, more alive, more being. This is why Teilhard said it's not a metaphysics, and it's very important for us to, we think in terms of metaphysics, some transcendent world that's beyond, that is somehow ruling and animating this world. But he called it a hyperphysics. It is beyond the being that we have, it's a more being. So the folding back on itself that happens with cultural evolution, it's not something that we even understand what it is that we're a part of. We're part of it. We're not the whole, but we're participating in a whole that's got the aim of convergence somehow. And for me, that translates into more loving relationships with others, more ability to understand where people are coming from, and accept more dialogue, more the good things, as opposed to the gaze that you look at with others and judge and impose, and you should this and you should that. It's that goes away. It's not holding yourself outside of something, but being inside something where you can actually feel the other. That, and Teilhard went on to say in his vision, and I know his vision isn't everything, but it's like one of the most remarkable visions I've ever heard.
Yeah.
He said that this convergence doesn't happen until the last minute, and he believed in the body and living Christ. So, you know, when you're drawn into the body of Christ in the final, you know, that's when the ultimate convergence happens, you know. No, who knows? It changes my view of everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, what that makes me think with the sort of more theological is if some aliens were looking at Earth and before humans came around, who knew this whole thing could emerge, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's hard to like, look what happened out of this folding back, nature folding back on itself again. And who knows what's gonna happen in the next stage, right? It's like explaining to ants what like, that's how I that's kind of like, yeah. So to me, being very imaginative with that is not a bad thing because who knows where this process is gonna lead in the next stage of evolution.
Yeah.
If the universe is 1 year old, symbolic consciousness is a fraction of a second. So who knows what it means? And you know, and we've had it for quite some time, you know, in our time frame. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I think the biological and genetic aspect is important. And I don't mean to reduce culture to biology. I think that's like an oversimplification. But I think one place where this folding back has resulted in harmony is the genetic story. Like how, like the organisms didn't go away after DNA came around. Like they're still the players. And it enabled and catalyzed more creativity because there was this externalized genetic medium. And Teilhard talks about like knowledge as being like the exteriorized heredity system that also enables creativity. And I want to hear your thoughts about technology because I know there are some people who are starting to think about technology as a human collaboration tool. This is quoting Jaron Lanier, the technologist. That's how he thinks about AI. It's a human collaboration tool. It's meant to empower us, not to replace us. So, what are your thoughts on technology and whether we could be inspired by this sort of cosmic and biological process?
Oh, well, I can start. I would say so within the vision that Monica and I are you know, articulating in our book. Uh, I'm repeating myself, but just to tie it back in, we think of the universe as beginning. The universe is beginning. It begins in desire. So that's a cosmological notion. So the start of the universe is desire, and then desire for what? Well, um, I've intimate community in a general sense, but that can be broken down into further components. So let me say this that for every species is involved with this cosmic desire from a different angle. It's the whole that it gives expression. But now focusing down on the human, the cosmic desire surfaces in our profound interest in reality, in life, in the universe. So we just, I'm talking about all humans in a sense, but I'm going to focus on science in that. I mean, we will do anything, but just we're so thrilled by what we have discovered. It's just, and as you pointed out, who knows what's next? I mean, it's just we're fascinated right down to at the cellular level and we would do anything to continue this life of exploration. Well, that led to technology. That doesn't say all technology relates to this desire to know, but a lot of it does. All right. But just to stay with that desire to know, that led to the technology of the James Webb Space Telescope. Now we make a big deal out of this. For us, 5 pages is a big deal because the book is real short, right? But we make a big deal out of the James Webb Space Telescope as, I mean, like, wow. It just blows my mind every time I think of it. We found a way of discovering that there was a spot 1,000,000 miles from Earth where if we could just get something there, it would stay right there without any like force to hold it from humans. It would stay right there. So you have the sun here and the Earth here, and 1,000,000 miles out, you have this satellite, and they all turn together so that the satellite, the James Webb Space Telescope, is always in the shadow. I mean, even to find the fact of this stationary point, that took, all of 300,000 years of human ingenuity. So now you go back, a Paleolithic person, they look out at the universe and they're fascinated by, what are those things? Let's call them stars. What do you imagine they would be? So we've been amazed by that. They were in contact with around 3,000 stars. Now, with the James Webb Space Telescope, we're in touch with 2 trillion galaxies, each one 100 billion stars. We're in touch with planets. I mean, just imagine what that would do to a Paleolithic mind. I mean, so my point is that there are other, what do you want to call them? I call them cosmological desires. One of them is to know the universe. Here's another one, to heal, so that, I know that the American system of health is a mess right now, but what we've learned about human physiology and development, amazing. Another cosmological desire is education. If we could, use some of the trillions of dollars that go into weapons, if we could use that for education, we would bring about a very different planet Earth. So those are some of my reflections on technology. I think it's not that technology has to improve, it's that humans do. We're the ones that entrap ourselves and to carry out wars. The transformation has to be deep in the human heart before we have technology that is very, very clearly beneficial. Monica?
When you were talking, I was thinking about convergence. So, the Paleolithic humans are in touch with one another as they began to travel around the surface of the Earth. They're becoming into community with their biomes, the furs, and they're deepening into the biome, adjusting and adapting as they go a little bit, but instead they're converging with their biomes, and they have some relationship with the stars around them, and they're doing this in terms of tools. So you're talking about technology, but instead of altering their DNA, when they're creating a tool that extends their body, they don't have to make a claw. It would take millions of years to evolve a claw, but they make one. And so the tool becomes an extension of the human body. And then the cerebralization becomes an extension of the human mind in symbols. Convergence happens when they begin to understand what each other's words mean and all of this. So the tools is like a physical matrix of externalized, and technology. is that, and today it continues. And some of it has been a melding of the cerebral aspect of it and the physical aspect of it, because you need both physical and mind-like aspects of the noosphere, right? So there's a melding there. It's just an extension of the human. That's what technology is. So our symbols, they increasingly present more and more of the world. So now we're in touch with trillions of galaxies. We're in touch with the background cosmic microwave background radiation that's been bathing us for all these years. Finally, we know a little bit more about what it means. And from that, determine the universe is developing. We didn't know that before 1964. Not for sure, it was speculated about, but 1964, we realized that this microwave, these photons are hitting us, and we know where they came from. So it becomes a symbol of this depth of knowledge, that a new knowing that can fundamentally change what it means for us to be present here, not placed on earth by God, but out of earth and out of everything. So that's convergence, where, and this is something that all of humanity can know. And as we realize that we are part of nation states, but we're also part of something much deeper. And yeah, and so it changed this technology, along with all the other aspects of the developing noosphere. It changes how we feel ourselves alive here and what we're about.
That's beautiful. The semiotician in me really likes the sort of microwave background radiation, that there was this sign there all along, but now we have to use Terry's Peirce terms, like the interpretive competence to realize that sign and make it more
That's great.
meaningful,
I love it.
make it meaningful in a way. And I mean, you used in the book, you used the sort of I think also about how the chimpanzee was in the
Yeah.
room or something, huh? For them was just hissing of a snake, but for us, so and I wonder if this sort of, as a result of this folding back, also the interpretive competence is gonna get increased. The
Yeah.
signs are gonna just become
Beautiful.
more enriched and more meaningful as this process goes on
And accelerates.
and
You
accelerate.
know,
I would object to is that when you said that, your voice got quiet at the end. Did you say that sentence again? About
Minded?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. That the interpretive competence is going to become more enriched and more meaningful as this unfolding and the folding back process happens.
I just want to say something about this, that statement, Barham. It's just so great. I so one of the things that Monica and I are doing in our book is to talk about a new story, right? A new story, and sometimes the third story. And wow, when you the statement you made that we have all these signs and all around us, and yet, and before we had no way of interpreting them. Not really. We just, if we're honest, we just would stay with, okay, we have these signs here. And but then suddenly we find the interpretive competence. Is that the phrase? Interpretive competence.
Yes.
And then suddenly to see through the sign to the symbol, like, wow, I just got this hit when you said it, of all around the planet, all these different educational centers providing the interpretive competence to see in photons the birth of the universe and a million other things. Wow.
Yeah.
I really love that.
And even more impressive is the interpretive competence is distributed. Like no one
Yes.
single person could have interpreted It's now in the symbolosphere and culture, and that's
And
also
that's the noosphere.
that's the
Yeah,
noosphere.
absolutely.
Exactly.
The collective.
Exactly. Ah,
And
no,
why
Wow.
it, since it's distributed, it's why it's so important for us to be in community and engaging and listening and dialoguing, you know?
yeah, no, exactly. That's like without that, this interpretation process would go away. Would lose the sign of micro background radiation being what it is. And I mean, also what's important is doesn't stop there. Like, what's a better interpretation of that
Yeah.
radiation, right?
Ongoing.
It's
Yeah.
ongoing. I mean, that's what I love about it too. Sticking with the James Webb Telescope, also the fact that, and also like touching on the distributed aspect of it, that it's it's been every person's effort to bring that about, and just
Yeah.
to acknowledge that is so important, right?
So
To
important.
so
So
important, right?
important.
Our colleague Boris Shoshiteshvili
Yeah.
talks about sort of deep time versus compressed time, and he
Yeah.
talks about how we had this narrative that we were so close to the origin of the universe, and we're so close to Noah and Abraham, like we were, so, and we took pride in that, the sort of proximity to the origin of the universe, and that was shattered with science.
Yeah.
We have this deep time story now, but a new story to complement the deep time is that look what we can achieve in such a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
though we've found out that we're very distant from the origins of the universe, yet when such a small amount of time we could do so much, and that's like the Anthropocene. Since the Anthropocene, each person has so can contribute so much in such a short amount of time, and that's the compressed time. That's also meaningful.
In,
Yes.
s- in some sense, you think even though you say, even though we're so distant from, the origin of the universe, but maybe because of something like neoteny or, something like that, um, and maybe because that depth of time is actually in each and every entity in the same way that the James Webb Space Telescope is, made real by this entire depth of everything. Um, Maybe because of that, we are the origin right here and now in this moment. You
Hmm.
you spoke about this in your paper. You said that with the recontextualization, and actually a Whitehead interpretation of the universe in some sense is that what is real is this feeling moment, this pulse of experience, right? And and um, so this is aligned with that kind of thought, in an omnicentric universe where everything goes back 13.8 billion years, that you are the center, and it isn't this deep, far place,
Hmm.
Hey, if you're a photon and you ask how long it took for that, when we're measuring with our static, with our instruments, if you're a photon, I mean, we look and we say it's 13.8 billion years old, and we can measure the time it took for that photon to get here. But if you're the photon and you ask the photon how long it took, what would the photon say? It'd say no time at all, so time's a funny thing.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know.
right.
Maybe we are not just this little speck of meaninglessness in this vast cold world.
Sure, sure. No, I think the sort of the focus on time that way can be a little counterproductive. The example of that parameter, the universal 10 to the power of 40, and now it's that time, the time that we became conscious of this. And the way I interpreted that was that's the parameter, us being here. It's not that time has passed, but the this happenstance of us realizing this about the universe. That's why that parameter is significant.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's such a subtle understanding to feel that, to get that part.
Very subtle, very subtle.
It's a tough one. It's like, whoa.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the anthropic principle.
Yes, yes. I mean, that's the anthropic principle. The way I've also heard it framed is it's usually brought up in the context of multiverse. And oh, the fact that you're here to think about this is because you're in the universe that worked out. So it's, to me, it's a little dismissive, the sort of the way it's usually mentioned, the anthropic principle. So it's, yeah, it's this is the universe that you could have asked that question. So it's not that significant. That's how I usually frame it, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
There's three versions according to Carr. There's the strong, the weak, and the final. And I think there are more advocates of the final anthropic principle, which is wonderful to see.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's in the end notes of the book.
And for our listeners, what is the final anthropic principle?
The final anthropic principle states intelligent information processing must come into existence in the universe. And once it has come into existence, it will never die out. It's provocative. It is saying it must happen, that from the beginning, the universe was aiming at just this. And it's not saying because it was multiple worlds and sooner or later there would have been one.
Hmm. Hmm. There was one part where you talk about this void of potential. There is this generative aspect of the universe. Do you know which concept I'm talking about?
The extraordinary realm.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'd love to hear more about that. That caught my attention in the book.
Sure. Well, uh, starting off from a purely scientific point of view, um, and this is controversial to say that the universe is more than what is actual. The universe is more than what is actual, so that we have all kinds of things taking place and they have interactions and so forth. That's the actual. But this extraordinary realm uh, exists as possibilities. So the possibilities are real, but not actual. So that would be just to start the conversation in terms of the scientific point of view. So a recent book by a really fine physicist and philosopher, Timothy Eastman, he goes into this and he's trying to establish beyond any doubt that the proper interpretation of quantum physics includes this realm, this of the vacuum of potentiality.
Mm.
So that we wanted to just lay that out, and but the way I like to think about it, it comes from Ilya Prigogine. So he and his followers would describe like starting a fire on in the universe, starting a fire, and it takes, as you know, it takes a number of conditions have to be met for there to be a flame, right? We're talking about oxygen and pressure and temperature and things like that. And so the way Ilya Prigogine, this fabulous chemist, the way he described it was that if you have the conditions that are right, and you just bring a little spark to it, this real complex process kicks in, and like you got a flame, a very rare event in the universe. And so his phrase is that the self-organizing dynamics are right there waiting at their marks.
Mm.
So that would be I think a lovely way of talking about the extraordinary realm from the aspect of physics. Is in every moment of our lives, there are literally, if you going with physics, millions of potential possible outcomes, millions upon millions. And there's the spark for humans is, human intention. And so, but then we wanted to suggest as well that the humans have reflected upon this extraordinary realm for millennia. And we think that to have a full, rich, intimate community, we have to be aware that of the nearbyness of these extraordinary powers carrying us forward. Monica, I know you want to jump in here.
Well, this is reminiscent also of what you speak about in your paper as the adjacent possible.
Yeah.
And it isn't just Timothy Eastman. This can go back to Heisenberg. And there are present day quantum physicists. One of them is Michael Epperson, he's written a couple of papers about how we should be taking Heisenberg's potentiality more seriously. All of our science and so much of our civilizations, especially since the axial times, the noetic turn, um, differentiated the transcendent realm from the immanent realm, and we imagine laws and gods that are out there that act on the stuff of the universe. And our human consciousness, our structure of experience has that in our past. And then after that noetic turn that occurred, 2,000, 2,500 years ago in civilizations all around the planet, we had more changes in our structure of consciousness. There was a time where we imagined creativity was impossible in the universe, that instead there were platonic forms, and in some sense everything is a footnote to Plato right now, right? Okay, so we imagine that the gods had to use those forms, like they didn't have true creativity. And then the Christians come along and they're like, no, creatio ex nihilo, we have to have true creativity for God. And then eventually they gave it to humans because we're made in the image of God. But we still imagine muses that deliver us ideas. It's a throwback to that. Okay, so then that's creativity. But what Epperson is actually calling for is to imagine that the creativity is right there at the level of the quantum. Because, okay, so later, after the turn to creativity, we then get Descartes, who separates matter from mind. Because we notice, whoa, we got consciousness too. There's something going on there, and it's inside here. But we're the only ones that have consciousness. And when I began my studies, honestly, I wanted to say that consciousness went all the way down. I don't want to say that anymore. But I do want to say that creativity goes all the way down. And I think the difference that we make between matter and creativity is only because we're in a metaphysics of being. And if we're in a metaphysics of becoming, then we don't need to make that distinction at all. That
That's
suddenly, and instead we need to recognize that it's not res extensia and res cogitans, it's res extensia and res potentia. And that everything that exists is existing in a sea of potency. And Epperson, the quantum physicist, is saying something like this too. And that's kind of cool.
That's fascinating. I mean, I see a lot of resonance here also with Peirce. He has this kind of metaphysics of firstness, secondness, and thirdness. And his firstness is that it's this realm of potentiality, this chance he thinks is primary. And out of that, you get some sportings that just are more reliable than others. So he calls that habit. And so that's his secondness. And he called the thirdness is sort of meta habit. It's the habit of habit generation. But it all comes back to the firstness, which is that the realm of potentiality and chance. So that's very interesting to me. And one way I've seen this manifest, sort of, I've connected this to science has been like there have been recent studies in neuroscience where people during psychedelic experiences and dreams, during those moments, the brain activity is actually reduced. So the metabolic activity is reduced. And that's so baffling. Like, why would it be that, we would expect with the standard neuroscience that during these profound experiences people have during psychedelic experiences, that you would have heightened metabolic activity, but to the contrary, there is reduction of metabolic activity. And so I wonder if what the brain's doing, what the DNA is doing, is actually constraining a space of potentiality and potential.
Mm.
And when you get rid of that constraints that the brain imposes and the DNA imposes as sort of filters, it could be thought of as filters on this realm of potentiality, where when you
That's cool.
get rid of that, then you get this sort of you get a peek to this realm that anything's possible.
The extraordinary realm.
So to me, that's how, with recent advances in science, that's been my interpretation of what this could look like, and looking at what we're doing as sort of constraining a space of possibilities. Even though you could think of the DNA or the brain as constraining the extraordinary realm,
Yeah.
what it affords then is increased novelty and creativity. By constraining that space of potential, we're embodying those forms that exist in that state in a novel way.
You got to
That's,
write about that. Is that in it's just terrific. Really great.
I wanted to ask, any final thoughts, any final comments? This has been wonderful. I feel like definitely went in very unpredictable ways, and it's been so enriching for me. Any final thoughts on our conversation, on anything you'd like?
Yeah, I would say that just being in conversation with you, Parham, and you, Monica, eh, there's an excitement and there's an aliveness, and we're just talking to each other, But it feels like we're connecting when in various ways with this cosmic creativity that's working through everything, and we met through the Human Energy Organization, the three of us. And I think of Ben Cassera and his dream, and we are that dream actualized. We're making it happen. And just a lot of gratitude for you, Parham, not only for your creativity, but for your creating these podcasts or videos or whatever they end up being. Just great to be part of it.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure. I feel the same way. Thank you.
And I feel the same way. And I love your work with these papers you've written. I want you to keep going. And yeah, it's really good stuff.
Great to know you.
Thank you, man. Great to know both of you. It's been I would say, like, knowing you both and through our conversation, it's been like very transformative for me. So I want to acknowledge that, and like saying that I'm grateful for all of our conversations and hope to continue.
Likewise.
Yeah, yeah.
Likewise.
All right. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Monica.
Thank
So
you.